It's strange, isn't it? How an entire world, an entire life built over 2 decades, can be balanced on something as small and as simple as a set of house keys. You're looking at them right now. Just a few pieces of metal on a worn leather fob. But in that moment, when I slid them across the polished wood of the table I built with my own 2 hands, they felt heavier than the foundation of this house. They represented everything. The past, the present, and a future that was shattering right before my eyes. My wife, Sarah, just stared at them. Her mouth, which always had a quick retort, a clever explanation, or a sweet deflection, was just still. The silence in that room was louder than any argument we'd ever had. It was the sound of a lie finally running out of room to breathe. And as I watched the color drain from her face, the only thought in my head was, how did we get here? How did the woman I loved become a stranger sitting in my living room? It all started 3 months ago, on a Tuesday that felt like any other. But it was the day the first crack appeared in the beautiful facade of our life together. I'm so glad you're here to listen to this. It's not an easy story to tell, but it's one I have to get out. It's about trust, betrayal, and the quiet secrets that can tear a family apart from the inside out. My name is David, and if you've ever felt that gut-wrenching suspicion that something isn't right in your own home, then you'll understand. The day it all began was drenched in the kind of late summer sun that makes you feel lazy and content. I'm a general contractor, so my days are filled with the smell of sawdust, the roar of power tools, and the satisfaction of turning a blueprint into a home. It's hard work, physical work, and when I get home, all I want is the peace and comfort that Sarah and I had built. Our house, nestled in a quiet suburb of Cincinnati, was my sanctuary. I didn't just buy it. I resurrected it. When we first got it, it was a dilapidated old farmhouse, a skeleton of its former self. But I saw the potential. Over 5 years, I poured every spare dollar and every ounce of my soul into it. I raised the roof, laid the hardwood floors myself, built the kitchen cabinets from raw maple. Sarah would bring me lemonade in the summer and hot coffee in the winter, her eyes shining with pride. "You're building our forever, David," she used to say, and I believed her. Every nail I hammered, every wall I painted, was a testament to that belief. That particular Tuesday, I'd come home early. The framing crew had finished ahead of schedule, and I was looking forward to surprising Sarah. I imagined us sitting on the back porch, watching the sunset, a couple of cold beers in our hands. The simple things. But when I walked in, the house was empty. A note on the counter said she'd gone out with her sister, Jessica. Nothing unusual about that. Sarah and Jessica were incredibly close, joined at the hip since they were kids. So, I decided to use the unexpected free time to tackle a project I'd been putting off for years, clearing out the attic. The attic was our home's final frontier, a dusty repository of forgotten memories. Old photo albums, my college textbooks, Sarah's wedding dress, sealed in a giant box, and stacks of my old financial records from before we merged our accounts. I needed to find the original blueprints for the house to plan an extension for my workshop. I was rummaging through a heavy wooden chest filled with old tax documents when my hand brushed against something that didn't belong. It was a shoebox, but not one of mine. It was a fancy one, the kind that expensive women's shoes come in. It was tucked way in the back, behind a stack of National Geographic magazines from the 90s. Curiosity got the better of me. I figured it was just old letters or keepsakes of hers. I pulled it out, blew a thick layer of dust off the lid, and opened it. Inside, nestled amongst some dried flowers and a few old concert tickets, was a stack of envelopes. They were pristine, white, and all from a bank I didn't recognize, a sleek, modern online bank called Apex Financial Trust. Our joint accounts, our mortgage, Everything was with the local credit union we'd used for 15 years. I picked up the top envelope. It was addressed to Sarah, right here at our address. But the statement inside wasn't for a checking account or a simple savings account. It was for a high-yield investment fund. My heart started a low, heavy thud against my ribs. I scanned the page, my eyes trying to make sense of the numbers. The closing balance was what made the air leave my lungs. $178,432.21. I sat there on the dusty attic floor, the single light bulb hanging overhead casting long, dancing shadows. $178,000. It was a number that didn't compute. We weren't poor, but we lived a comfortable, middle-class life. We drove reliable cars, took a vacation to the beach every other year, and were slowly paying down our mortgage. A sum like that was life-changing money. It was new truck money, pay off the house money, travel the world money, and I had no idea it existed. My first thought was that it had to be a mistake. A scam, maybe? Or an inheritance she hadn't told me about yet, waiting for the right moment. But the statements were dated monthly, going back over a year, each one showing a consistent, almost rhythmic deposit. I flipped through them, my hands starting to tremble. Every month, for the last 3 years, there were deposits. Sometimes $1,500, sometimes $2,000, sometimes more. It was methodical. It was planned. This wasn't a one-time windfall. This was a secret. A deliberate, long-term secret she was keeping from me, in the house I had built for us. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a surprise fund. Maybe she was saving up to buy me that vintage pickup truck I'd always dreamed of, or for a huge anniversary trip. But the feeling in my gut, that cold, coiling knot of dread, told me otherwise. Surprises don't get hidden in dusty shoeboxes in the attic. They don't come from secret banks. And they certainly don't amount to a small fortune without your partner ever mentioning it. The sunlight streaming through the small attic window started to fade, and the shadows grew longer, darker. The joyful anticipation I'd felt just an hour earlier had curdled into something heavy and ominous. I carefully put the statements back in the box, tucked it away exactly where I found it, and went downstairs. The house felt different, colder. The walls I had built with so much love suddenly felt like they were closing in on me, hiding a truth I wasn't ready to face. I sat in the living room, in the encroaching darkness, waiting for my wife to come home, knowing that our life would never, ever be the same again. I just didn't know how much worse it was about to get. This is just the beginning of the story. The first crack. The chasm that opened up afterward is something I'm still trying to comprehend. If you want to hear how this all unfolds, and I promise you, it's a journey you won't expect, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You're not going to want to miss what comes next. When Sarah's car finally pulled into the driveway, the sound of the crunching gravel felt unnaturally loud in the evening quiet. I'd been sitting there in the dark for over an hour, replaying the discovery in my mind, each loop making the numbers on that bank statement seem larger, more impossible. The knot in my stomach had tightened into a solid ball of ice. I watched her through the window as she got out of the car, laughing at something on her phone. She looked beautiful, the same way she always did. Her blonde hair caught the last rays of the sunset, and she had that easy, carefree smile that had first made me fall in love with her 20 years ago. For a fleeting second, I felt a surge of guilt. Maybe I was blowing this out of proportion. Maybe there was a simple, innocent explanation, and I was about to ruin a perfectly good evening with my paranoia. But then she walked inside, and the moment she saw me sitting there in the dim light, her smile faltered. Just for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something, was it surprise? Apprehension? Crossed her face before she replaced it with a bright, familiar grin. "David, you're home early. Why are you sitting in the dark, you big weirdo?" she said. her voice lilting and playful. She dropped her purse on the entryway table and came over to kiss me on the cheek. Her perfume, the same light floral scent she'd worn for years, filled the air, a scent I associated with comfort and home. Tonight, it felt cloying, almost suffocating. I forced a smile, but I knew it didn't reach my eyes. Yeah, crew finished up, so I thought I'd get a head start on the weekend. I tried to keep my voice even normal. I didn't want to come at her with accusations. I wanted to give her the chance to be honest with me. That's what partners do, right? You give each other the benefit of the doubt. We went through the motions of our evening routine. She talked about her day with Jessica, a story about a ridiculously overpriced dress they saw at the mall. I nodded and made the right noises, but my mind was miles away, back up in that dusty attic with that shoebox. I couldn't shake the image of those bank statements. The clean, crisp paper felt like an alien artifact in our life, a life built on shared dreams and, I thought, shared finances. We sat down for dinner, a simple meal of leftovers she heated up. The silence between her sentences felt cavernous. Every normal pause in conversation seemed to stretch, filled with the things I wasn't saying. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I put my fork down, the sound echoing slightly in the quiet kitchen. "Sarah," I started, my voice sounding rougher than I intended. "I was up in the attic today, looking for the old blueprints." I watched her face carefully. She didn't flinch. She just took a sip of her water, her eyes calm and attentive over the rim of the glass. "Oh, yeah? Did you find them?" she asked, her tone perfectly casual. "No," I said, shaking my head slowly. "But I did find something else. An old shoebox, with some bank statements in it." There it was, the briefest pause, the subtle stiffening of her shoulders. Her eyes, which had been warm and open a second before, became guarded, watchful. It was a micro-expression, so small that if I hadn't been looking for it, I would have missed it completely. But I saw it, and it confirmed everything my gut had been screaming at me. "Oh, that old thing," she said, letting out a little laugh that sounded forced, brittle. "I totally forgot about that. It's nothing, honey. Just a little savings thing I started a while ago." Her attempt at nonchalance was almost convincing. Almost. "A little savings thing," I repeated, keeping my voice low, steady. "Sarah, I saw the balance. It's nearly $200,000. That's not a little savings thing. That's a fortune. Why wouldn't you tell me about it?" I wasn't yelling. I was pleading in a way. Pleading for her to give me a reason to believe in her, to erase the sick feeling that was crawling up my spine. She set her glass down and reached across the table, placing her hand on mine. Her skin was cool. "David, listen to me," she said, her voice dropping into that soothing, earnest tone she used when she was trying to convince me of something. "I was saving it for us. For a surprise. A really big one. A surprise." The word hung in the air between us. It was the exact excuse I had preemptively offered myself in the attic, and hearing it from her lips now felt hollow, rehearsed. "A surprise?" I asked. "What kind of surprise costs that much money and takes 3 years of secret deposits to fund?" She squeezed my hand, her thumb rubbing gentle circles on my skin. It was a familiar, comforting gesture that now felt like a calculated move in a game I didn't know we were playing. "I can't tell you," she whispered, a playful glint in her eye. "It would ruin it. But trust me, you're going to love it. It's for our future, our dream." She was good. I had to give her that. She was turning my own love and trust for her into a weapon against my suspicion. She was making me feel like the bad guy for even questioning her. If I pushed further, I was the one who didn't trust her. The one who was ruining this grand, romantic gesture she had been planning for years. This is what they call gaslighting, isn't it? making you question your own sanity, your own perception of reality. I felt my resolve beginning to crumble under the weight of her performance. Maybe she was telling the truth. Maybe in a few months, she would reveal she'd bought a lakeside cabin for us to retire in, or that she'd booked a year-long trip around the world. The desire to believe her was overwhelming. It was a physical ache in my chest. Believing her meant our life could go back to normal. Disbelieving her meant stepping off a cliff into an unknown darkness. "Just tell me where the money is from, Sarah," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "How did you save that much without me noticing?" She pulled her hand back, a flicker of frustration crossing her face before she smoothed it over. "I've been working on some freelance design projects on the side. And, a little bit from the grocery budget here, a little bit there. It adds up over time. I'm good at being frugal when I have a goal. Freelance projects?" She hadn't mentioned any freelance work. "And the grocery budget?" I gave her a generous amount for household expenses, but not enough to skim off $2,000 a month. The lies were starting to pile up, each one more flimsy than the last. She must have seen the doubt on my face, because she stood up and started clearing the table, her movements sharp and efficient. "You know what? I'm tired of this," she said, her voice suddenly edged with ice. "I spend years planning something wonderful for our marriage, a testament to how much I love you, and you treat me like a criminal. You go snooping through my private things and then you interrogate me." She turned to face me, her eyes flashing. "Maybe I should just cancel the whole thing. Is that what you want?" And there it was, the classic maneuver. She had flipped the entire situation. Now I was the one who had to apologize. I was the one who had to make things right. I sat there, stunned into silence, as she carried the dishes to the sink, her back rigid with indignation. I felt like I was in a play where everyone had a script but me. That night, we went to bed in a silence that was heavier and more suffocating than the attic dust. She lay on her side of the bed, her back to me, a stiff, unyielding wall. I lay on my back, staring up at the ceiling I had plastered and painted, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. The trust I had in her, the bedrock of our entire marriage, had been fractured, and her explanation, meant to patch the crack, had only made it wider. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that she was lying, and I knew I couldn't let it go. My investigation into my own wife had just begun. The days that followed that disastrous dinner were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Sarah acted as if the conversation had never happened. She was sweet, attentive, and affectionate, almost overly so. She'd pack my lunch in the morning with a little note tucked inside, something she hadn't done in years. She'd call me in the afternoon just to ask how my day was going. She suggested we go out for a fancy dinner that weekend, to our favorite Italian place downtown. It was a full-court press of normalcy, a relentless campaign designed to make me feel insane for ever doubting her. She was trying to bury my suspicions under a mountain of pleasantries. But every time she smiled at me, every time she touched my arm, all I could see was that guarded look in her eyes from the other night. All I could hear was the brittleness in her voice when she'd called her secret fortune a little savings thing. Her kindness didn't feel like love anymore. It felt like a strategy. I played along. I smiled back. I accepted her kisses. I told her dinner downtown sounded wonderful. But inside, I was a man possessed. My work on the job sites suffered. I'd find myself staring into space, a power saw whining idly in my hand, my mind replaying our conversation, dissecting every word, every gesture. My crew started giving me concerned looks. "Everything okay, boss?" my foreman Mike asked one afternoon. "You seem a million miles away." I just waved him off, blaming it on stress or lack of sleep. How could I tell him that my mind was consumed with the fact that my wife of 20 years was potentially a financial mastermind and a pathological liar? My real work began late at night. After Sarah was sound asleep, or pretending to be, I would slip out of bed and go down to my office in the basement. That small, wood-paneled room, once my refuge for drafting plans and managing invoices, became my war room. With the door closed and a towel wedged underneath to block the light, I transformed from a contractor into a forensic accountant, with my own life as the subject of the audit. I started with our joint accounts, the ones I had always trusted her to manage. Sarah had always handled the day-to-day bills. "You're busy building empires, honey," she'd say with a smile. "Let me handle the little stuff." I had always seen it as a sign of our partnership, a division of labor that worked for us. Now, I saw it as a terrifying vulnerability. I logged into our credit union's website, the screen glowing in the dark room, and began to go through years of statements. At first, everything looked normal. Mortgage payments, car insurance, utility bills, credit card payments, the rhythm of a predictable suburban life. But then I started looking closer, searching for the patterns. I wasn't looking for huge, glaring withdrawals. Based on her secret account, the deposits were consistent, not enormous. She was smart. She was bleeding us slowly, not stabbing us. And then I found them. It started about 3 years ago, just as the secret statements indicated. Every month, there were 2 or 3 cash withdrawals from ATMs. Never more than $300 at a time. They were spaced out, always from different machines in different parts of town. And then there were the checks. Small checks made out to cash. $500 here, $750 there. On their own, they were nothing. You'd assume it was for groceries, for pocket money, for a weekend trip. But when I added them all up, month after month, the numbers began to align with chilling precision. It averaged out to between $1,500 and $2,000 a month. The exact amounts being deposited into her secret Apex financial account. My hands grew cold as I stared at the screen. The evidence was right there, hidden in plain sight for years. I had never noticed. I had trusted her completely. I had worked 60-hour weeks, my body aching, my hands calloused, to provide for us, to fill those accounts. And she had been systematically draining them behind my back, funneling the money into a secret fund, all while smiling in my face and telling me she loved me. The betrayal was so profound, it felt physical. It was a hollow, aching void in my chest. This wasn't just about the money. The money was a symptom. The disease was the deception. Our entire marriage, the forever she talked about, suddenly felt like a lie. I started observing her with a new, painful clarity. I watched the way her fingers flew across her phone screen, the device always angled away from me. I noticed how she would take calls in the other room, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper if I walked in. One afternoon, I came home to find her on the back porch, deep in a hushed phone conversation. The moment she saw me through the glass door, she startled, her eyes wide with panic. I have to go," she stammered into the phone and hung up abruptly. When I asked who it was, she waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, just Jessica. You know how she is. Drama with her ex again." But the panic I'd seen on her face wasn't the kind you have when talking about your sister's boring relationship problems. It was the look of someone who had been caught. The house, my beautiful sanctuary, began to feel like a prison. Every room held the ghost of a happy memory that now seemed tainted. The kitchen where we danced while cooking dinner now felt like the scene of a crime. The bedroom where we had shared our deepest secrets now felt like a stage for her elaborate performance. I felt a growing sense of isolation, a paranoia that was completely justified. I was a stranger in my own life, A detective investigating a conspiracy where I was the primary victim, and the lead suspect was sleeping next to me every night. I needed more than just financial records. I needed to know why. The surprise party excuse was dead and buried. This was something else. This was a long-term, calculated plan. But for what? Was she in debt? Was she being blackmailed? Was she having an affair and building a nest egg to run away with someone else? That last thought was a dagger to the heart. I started looking for other signs. A new interest in her appearance, unexplained absences, the classic tells. But there was nothing. She was the same Sarah she'd always been on the surface. Her routine was unchanged. Then, one evening, I found another clue. She had fallen asleep on the couch, her laptop still open on the coffee table. The screen had gone dark, but when I gently touched the trackpad, it flickered to life. The page she had been on was Zillow. Real estate. My heart gave a hopeful leap. Maybe she was looking for a surprise cabin for us. Maybe I had been wrong all along. I moved the cursor, my hand hovering, feeling a renewed wave of guilt from my snooping. But my eyes fell on the search bar at the top of the page. The city she had been searching for wasn't anywhere near us. It wasn't in Ohio. It wasn't even in the Midwest. She had been looking at 3-bedroom houses in a quaint, picturesque town I'd never heard of. Asheville, North Carolina. And she hadn't just been browsing. She had a saved list. A list of favorites. A list of potential new homes. 1,000 miles away from me. Seeing Asheville, North Carolina on that screen was like having a bucket of ice water thrown on the last dying embers of hope I had. The cabin fantasy, the round-the-world trip, all those innocent explanations evaporated in an instant. You don't browse for family homes in another state as a surprise. You do it when you're planning a new life. A life that, clearly, did not include me. A cold, clinical rage began to replace the hot, chaotic pain I'd been feeling. My mission was no longer just to understand why. It was to understand the full scope of the operation. Who was involved? What was the end game? I felt like a man whose house was being slowly dismantled around him, and I needed to find the demolition crew before they brought the whole thing down. The name that kept coming back to me was Jessica, Sarah's sister. They were always whispering, always texting. Every time Sarah offered a flimsy excuse for a phone call or an errand, Jessica's name was the alibi. Just grabbing coffee with Jess. Jessica needed me to help her pick out paint colors. Their sisterly bond, which I had once found endearing, now seemed like a smokescreen for a conspiracy. I started paying closer attention whenever Jessica was around. Jessica was, in many ways, Sarah's opposite. While Sarah had a soft, comforting presence, Jessica was sharp edges and restless energy. She was a real estate agent, a fact that now seemed glaringly significant. She was divorced, always seemed to be struggling financially despite her flashy clothes and brand-new SUV, and she carried a perpetual air of dissatisfaction, as if the world owed her something it had failed to deliver. She had a habit of making little passive-aggressive digs at me, always disguised as jokes. "Must be nice having a husband who can build you a palace, Sarah," she'd say, gesturing around our living room. "Some of us have to actually work for a living." I used to brush it off as simple jealousy. Now, I saw it as genuine resentment. A couple of weeks after I found the Zillow search history, Jessica came over for dinner. The whole evening was an exercise in strained politeness. I watched them interact, looking for tells. They had a way of communicating without words, a shared glance, a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. They were a team, and I was the outsider at my own dinner table. While I was clearing the plates, I heard them talking in low voices on the back porch. I slowed my movements, straining to hear through the open kitchen window. "The closing date is getting closer," Jessica was saying, her voice a low, urgent hum. We need the final transfer from the Apex account by the end of the month. Did you talk to him? My blood ran cold. The Apex account. It was real, it was active, and it was tied to a closing date. They were buying something. Sarah's voice was a nervous whisper. Not yet. He's been watching me, I think. He asked about the account a few weeks ago. I told him it was a surprise for him. There was a short, sharp laugh from Jessica. A surprise? Seriously? And he bought that? I don't know if he bought it, but he dropped it, Sarah replied, her voice defensive. I just need more time. He's been stressed lately. It's not the right moment to bring up, you know. There's never going to be a right moment, Sarah, Jessica snapped, her voice losing its whispery quality and gaining a hard, impatient edge. Do you want this or not? Do you want to get Mom and Dad out of that dump and finally have a place for us? A place that's ours? Or do you want to keep playing house with him for the rest of your life? Dad's health isn't getting any better. We have a window, and it's closing. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with a sickening finality. This wasn't about Sarah leaving me for another man. This was, in some ways, worse. This was a complete and total betrayal orchestrated by her entire family. They were using my money, the money I bled and sweated for, to build a new life for themselves in North Carolina. A life for Sarah, Jessica, and their parents. A life from which I was to be completely excluded. I was not a husband, I was a resource. A living, breathing ATM machine whose only purpose was to fund their escape plan. The house in Asheville wasn't for us. It was for them. I felt a dizzying wave of vertigo, and I had to grip the edge of the counter to steady myself. The whole conversation was probably less than a minute long, but it had detonated 20 years of my life. My mind raced back through the years. The time Sarah had mentioned her parents' financial struggles, the loans we had given them that were never paid back, her father's health problems, which always seemed to coincide with a need for a few $1,000s. I had always agreed without hesitation. They were family, after all. My family. But I had been a fool. I wasn't supporting them. I was being systematically fleeced. I walked back into the dining room, my face a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. They both looked up at me, their conversation stopping abruptly. Their faces were studies in feigned innocence. Everything okay out there? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Oh, yeah, just sister stuff, Jessica said with a breezy smile, waving her hand dismissively. You know how at Island... I looked from her smiling face to my wife's, and for the first time, I saw the truth clearly. I wasn't just married to Sarah. I was married to her entire family's baggage, to their resentments, and to their greed. And they had been playing me for a fool for years. When Jessica finally left, leaving a trail of expensive perfume in her wake, the silence she left behind was heavy with unspoken truths. Sarah avoided my eyes, busying herself with tidying up a room that was already spotless. The dynamic between us had shifted permanently. I was no longer the suspicious husband. I was a man who knew the truth, or at least the horrifying outline of it. And she, I suspected, knew that I knew. The game had changed. We were no longer partners, not even adversaries playing by some unspoken rules. We were two people living in the same house, waiting for the other to make the final move. The question was no longer what she was doing, but what I was going to do about it. My love for her, which had been dying a slow death for weeks, was now being replaced by something else. A cold, hard resolve. She had a plan for her future. It was time for me to start making a plan for mine. The revelation on the back porch changed the chemical composition of the air in our house. The game of pretense was over, at least for me. Sarah, however, doubled down. She became even more solicitous, more cloyingly sweet, as if she could somehow reverse the damage with a constant barrage of affection. It was a suffocating, transparent performance. She'd ask about my day with a wide-eyed intensity that felt completely artificial. She'd suggest we watch my favorite movies, the old black-and-white westerns she'd always claimed to find boring. Every gesture was a lie, a desperate attempt to keep me docile and oblivious just a little bit longer, until her and Jessica's plan could come to fruition. But I was no longer oblivious. I was hyper-aware. My senses were heightened to a painful degree. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head. My focus shifted from discovery to documentation. I was no longer just a wounded husband. I was building a case. I returned to the attic one afternoon when I knew she'd be out with Jessica for hours. This time, I didn't feel the same emotional turmoil. I felt a cold, methodical purpose. I pulled out the shoebox and, using my phone, took high-resolution pictures of every single bank statement, every page, every number. I photographed the box itself and its hiding place. I then moved to my basement office and began a meticulous process of cross-referencing. I created a spreadsheet. On one side, I listed every cash withdrawal and every check made out to cash from our joint account for the past 3 years. On the other side, I listed the corresponding deposits into the Apex financial account. The dates didn't always match up perfectly. She was smart enough to create a lag, but the monthly totals were almost identical. It was a clear, undeniable trail of theft, a systematic siphoning of our shared resources into her secret fund. But the financial evidence was only one part of the story. I needed to know more about the Asheville house. It had become the symbol of her betrayal, a brick-and-mortar monument to her deceit. I waited for another night when she fell asleep early, a book resting on her chest. I gently lifted her laptop from the coffee table and took it down to the basement. My heart was pounding, not with fear of being caught, but with the grim anticipation of what I would find. I opened the browser, and her Zillow history was still there. She hadn't even bothered to clear it, a sign of her confidence, or perhaps her arrogance. She believed I had accepted her surprise story and moved on. I clicked on her list of saved homes. There were 4 of them. All were charming, spacious houses in the Blue Ridge Mountains, with big yards and wraparound porches. They were family homes. I clicked on the one that was marked as pending. My breath caught in my throat. A beautiful 4-bedroom craftsman-style house on a tree-lined street. The listing price was $585,000. I did the math in my head. A standard 20% down payment would be $117,000. Her secret account held over $178,000. It was more than enough for the down payment, closing costs, and furnishing the place. I scrolled through the photos, my stomach churning. I saw the spacious kitchen where she and Jessica would cook meals. I saw the bedrooms for her parents. I saw the sunny living room where they would celebrate holidays without me. I saw the life they had been planning, a life built on the foundations of my hard work and my trust. And then I found the smoking gun. In her email, which was still logged in, I found a chain of correspondence with a real estate agent in Asheville. The agent's name was on the Zillow listing. The emails were chillingly professional. They discussed the offer, the counter-offer, and the inspection report. And then I saw it. An email from the agent with the subject line, "Offer accepted on 124 Chestnut Lane." Attached was the purchase agreement. I clicked on it, my hand shaking so badly I could barely control the mouse. The document loaded, and there, under the section for buyers, were 2 names, Sarah Miller and Jessica Miller. My name was nowhere to be found. I felt a profound, deafening silence in my head. The world just stopped. It was the kind of moment where everything you thought you knew about your life, about your partner, about your own judgment, is revealed to be a complete fiction. I had spent 20 years loving a woman who, in the end, saw me as nothing more than a funding source for her real life, her real family. The love, the laughter, The shared dreams, it was all a performance. I was the producer, the director, and the unwitting financial backer of a play in which I wasn't even a character. I was just the audience, and a blind one at that. I sat there in the cold basement for what felt like hours, staring at the screen. The rage I had felt earlier was gone, replaced by a vast, empty coldness. The betrayal was so absolute, so all-encompassing, that it was almost sublime in its cruelty. It wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a 3-year-long, meticulously planned conspiracy to defraud me of my money, my home, and my future. I slowly and deliberately began to save everything. I downloaded the entire email chain. I saved the purchase agreement as a PDF. I took screenshots of the Zillow listing, the saved homes, everything. I created a new password-protected folder on a thumb drive, which I then hid in my workshop inside a hollowed-out block of wood. This was no longer a domestic dispute. This was evidence. I went back upstairs and looked at Sarah, sleeping peacefully in our bed. She looked so innocent, so familiar, the woman I had promised to love and cherish, in sickness and in health. But the woman I saw now was a stranger, a cunning, ruthless operator who had mastered the art of deception. The love I felt for her had been surgically removed, cauterized by the cold, hard proof of her betrayal. I knew I couldn't confront her yet. Not like this. A screaming match would accomplish nothing. She would just lie, deny, and manipulate her way out of it. No, this required a plan. My plan. She had been playing a long game of chess. It was time for me to stop playing checkers and knock the entire board over. The question was, how? I needed leverage. I needed to protect what was mine. And most importantly, I needed to see this through to the end, on my own terms. The quiet, trusting husband was gone for good. In his place was a man who had nothing left to lose, and everything to fight for. The days after discovering the signed purchase agreement were the strangest of my life. I was living in a state of suspended reality. On the outside, I was David Miller, contractor, husband. I went to work, I managed my crews, I came home, I ate dinner with my wife, but on the inside, I was a ghost haunting my own life. I was watching a movie of my marriage, knowing the devastating ending, while the lead actress remained blissfully unaware that I'd read the final page of the script. The coldness I felt had settled deep into my bones. It wasn't an angry, fiery rage anymore. It was a chilling, calculating calm. The emotional devastation had happened down in the basement that night. Now it was time for logistics. My first call wasn't to a divorce lawyer. It was to my own lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense guy named Frank who had handled all my business contracts for years. I trusted him implicitly. I met him at his office, a place of dark wood and the smell of old books, and laid out the entire story. I didn't hold back. I told him about the attic, the secret bank account, the spreadsheet I'd created, the overheard conversation, and finally, the purchase agreement for the house in Asheville. I handed him the thumb drive with all the evidence I had collected. Frank listened without interrupting, his face impassive. He clicked through the files on his computer, his eyes scanning the bank statements and the real estate contract. When he was done, he leaned back in his leather chair and looked at me, not with pity, but with a kind of grim respect. "David," he said, his voice low and serious, "this is not just an infidelity. This is calculated, long-term financial fraud. This is a conspiracy to divest you of marital assets. She and her sister have been planning this for years." Hearing him put it in such stark legal terms was validating. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I was a victim of a sophisticated scheme. "So, what do I do?" I asked, my voice flat. "Do I confront her? Do I file for divorce?" Frank held up a hand. "No, Not yet. You have the element of surprise, and right now, that's your only real weapon. The moment you confront her, she and her sister will go into damage control. They'll move the money. They'll hide assets. They'll lawyer up and paint you as an abusive, controlling husband to justify their actions. We are not going to give them that chance. His advice was counterintuitive to every emotional impulse I had. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw her out of the house. But Frank's logic was sound. This was a battle that would be won with strategy, not with emotion. First thing we need to do is protect what is unequivocally yours, Frank continued. He pulled up the property records for our house. You bought this property and began renovations before you were married, correct? The deed is in your name alone? Yes, I confirmed. I put her on the joint bank accounts after we got married, but the house was always mine. It was my project before she was even fully in the picture. That, Frank said with a thin smile, is your saving grace. Under Ohio law, that makes the house itself your separate property. While any increase in its value during the marriage could be considered a marital asset, the core property is yours. We need to reinforce that. He advised me to open a new bank account in my own name at a different bank. I was to have my contracting business income deposited directly there from now on. We also placed a lien on our house. It was a legal maneuver that would prevent it from being sold or used as collateral for a loan without my express consent. It was a silent, invisible shield that I was placing around my life's work. The next step was harder. Frank wanted me to continue playing the part of the oblivious husband. Let her think her plan is working, he said. Let her make that final transfer for the house. Let her go all the way to the closing. The further she goes, the deeper the hole she's digging for herself and her sister. Legally speaking, we want to catch them in the act, with undeniable proof of their intent. So, I went home and continued the charade. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I had to sit across the dinner table from her, listening to her talk about her day, knowing she had spent it finalizing the logistics of stealing my money to start a new life. I had to sleep next to her, feeling the warmth from her body, knowing that it was all a lie. Some nights I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, overwhelmed by the sheer audacity of her deception. She wasn't just stealing from me, she was stealing our memories. She was retroactively erasing 20 years of what I thought was a loving partnership. During this time, I saw the signs that her plan was accelerating. She started packing boxes, telling me it was just some spring cleaning in the fall. She claimed she was getting rid of old clothes and books to donate, but I knew she was packing her life away, piece by piece. One afternoon, I saw a large moving van parked down the street. It was from an interstate moving company. My heart hammered in my chest. I watched from the window as Sarah and Jessica directed two movers, carrying boxes out of Jessica's house and loading them into the truck. They were pooling their resources, preparing for the big move. The day I knew it was all coming to a head was a Friday. Sarah was on the phone all morning, in a state of barely concealed excitement. Yes, the wire transfer went through this morning. I heard her whisper excitedly to Jessica. It's all there. We're all set for Tuesday. Tuesday. That was the closing date. She had done it. She had drained the Apex account and sent the down payment. She had crossed the final line. That evening, she was practically glowing. She made my favorite meal steak, mashed potatoes, and green beans. She opened a bottle of expensive wine. She was celebrating the end of her life with me, and the beginning of her new one, financed by me. What's the special occasion? I asked, my voice carefully neutral, as I swirled the red wine in my glass. She gave me a radiant, almost pitying smile. No occasion, she said, her voice soft. Just happy to be here with you. The lie was so blatant, so insulting, it was almost poetic. She was toasting her victory right in my face. And as I raised my glass to meet hers, I felt no anger. I felt no pain. I felt nothing but a profound, icy calm. The waiting was over. The charade was finished. It was time to make my move. Frank had told me to wait until after the closing, but I couldn't. I had to end it now. Tonight. Before she could pack one more box, before she could tell one more lie in my house. The final act of our marriage was about to begin. After we finished that celebratory funereal dinner, Sarah went upstairs to take a bath. I could hear the water running, the faint sound of her humming a cheerful tune. The casualness of it, the absolute lack of guilt or remorse, was what solidified my resolve. This wasn't a woman who had made a mistake. This was a woman who believed she had gotten away with it. While she was occupied, I moved with a quiet efficiency that would have made a SWAT team proud. My mind was crystal clear, every action deliberate. The time for emotion was over. This was about reclaiming my life. I went down to my workshop, the one place in the house that still felt entirely mine, untouched by her deceit. I retrieved the thumb drive from its hiding place inside the hollowed-out block of wood. I returned to my basement office and began the final preparations. I printed everything. Every single page of the secret Apex financial statements. The spreadsheet I had made, showing the systematic transfer of funds from our joint account. The complete email chain between Sarah, Jessica, and the Asheville real estate agent. And finally, the pièce de résistance. A clean, full-color copy of the signed purchase agreement for 124 Chestnut Lane, with her name and her sister's name listed as the buyers. I arranged the documents on the large oak coffee table in the living room. It was the first piece of furniture I had ever built for us, crafted from a tree that had fallen on the property. Now, it would serve as the stage for the final act. I laid the papers out not in a messy pile, but in a neat, chronological narrative. It was the story of her betrayal, told in black and white. From the first secret deposit to the final, accepted offer. It was undeniable. It was irrefutable. With the evidence in place, I moved on to the next phase of the plan Frank and I had discussed. I went into our home office and found the checkbook for our main joint account. I wrote 2 checks. The first was to my lawyer, Frank, for a sizable retainer. The second check was to myself for the full remaining balance in the account. It wasn't a huge amount. She had been draining it for years. After all, but it was enough. I was legally entitled to half of it, but Frank had assured me that, given the evidence of her fraudulent activity, liquidating the account to protect the remaining assets was a justifiable legal maneuver. It was a preemptive strike. I took the checks and my car keys and drove to the 24-hour ATM at our credit union. I deposited both checks into my new personal account. The transaction was instant. The joint account, our financial lifeline for 15 years, was now empty, a hollowed-out shell, just like our marriage. When I returned to the house, the water upstairs had stopped running. I knew she would be down soon. I took a moment to walk through the downstairs rooms, my rooms. I looked at the built-in bookshelves I had crafted, the mantelpiece I had carved, the bay window I had installed. This house was a physical extension of me. It was the product of my labor, my skill, my dedication. And she had tried to use it as a temporary base of operations while she plotted to steal my future. The thought didn't even make me angry anymore. It just filled me with a profound sense of purpose. I was not just fighting for my money. I was fighting for my home, for my work, for the very integrity of my life. I sat down on the leather armchair opposite the coffee table, the one directly facing the couch where she always Saturday. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't pick up a book. I just sat there, in the quiet, ambient light of the living room, and I waited. The house was silent, except for the steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from my parents. Tick, tock. Each sound felt like a countdown. After about 20 minutes, I heard her footsteps on the stairs. She came into the living room wearing a silk robe, her hair wrapped in a towel, her face glowing from the steam of the bath. She looked relaxed, happy, and completely unsuspecting. "Hey, you," she said with a soft smile. "I was just about to make some tea. Do you want some?" Her eyes hadn't yet fallen on the coffee table. She was still living in the world where her plan was a secret, where she was just days away from her new life. "No, thank you," I said, my voice even. "I think you should sit down, Sarah. We need to talk." My tone, devoid of its usual warmth, was what finally made her pause. Her smile faltered. She looked at me. Then her gaze dropped to the coffee table. I watched her as she processed the scene. I saw her eyes move from the bank statements to the purchase agreement. I saw the color physically drain from her face, leaving her skin a pale, waxy yellow. I saw her body go rigid, her hand instinctively clutching the lapel of her robe. The mask of the loving wife didn't just slip. It shattered into a million pieces, revealing the cold, calculating stranger underneath. She didn't speak. She didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She just stood there, frozen, her eyes wide with the silent, horrifying realization that the game was over. She had been caught, utterly and completely. The humming, cheerful woman who had come down the stairs just a minute ago was gone. In her place was a trapped animal, realizing the walls of the cage had just slammed shut. Sarah stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, her eyes locked on the damning mosaic of paper I had laid out on the coffee table. The grandfather clock in the hall continued its relentless ticking, each second dropping into the profound silence of the room like a stone into a deep well. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The evidence was speaking for me, shouting a story of years of deception. I watched as her mind worked, the wheels visibly turning behind her panicked eyes. I could almost see her cycling through a Rolodex of lies, searching for an explanation, a way to spin this, a way to manipulate her way out of the corner I had backed her into. But for the first time, there was no escape route. The proof was too absolute. Finally, she seemed to deflate, her shoulders slumping. She slowly walked over to the couch and sank into it, her movements stiff and robotic. She didn't look at me. She continued to stare at the papers, as if hoping they would spontaneously combust and vanish. Her hand trembled as she reached out and picked up the top page of the Apex financial statement. She held it, as if it were contaminated. "David," she began, her voice a dry, cracking whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "David, this isn't what it looks like." It was a pathetic, cliché opening, the last resort of the guilty. I felt a humorless smile touch my lips. "Oh, I think it's exactly what it looks like, Sarah," I said, my voice calm, measured, and completely devoid of the emotion she was used to hearing from me. "It looks like you opened a secret bank account 3 years ago. It looks like you have been systematically funneling money from our joint account into it every single month. It looks like you have amassed a secret fortune of over $178,000. And it looks like you used that money, my money, to put a down payment on a house in Asheville, North Carolina with your sister." I paused, letting each factual statement land. With every point I made, she seemed to shrink a little more into the couch cushions. "A house," I continued, leaning forward slightly, "that you were scheduled to close on this coming Tuesday. A house that you were planning to move into with your parents and your sister, starting a new life, leaving me behind with an empty bank account and an empty home." She finally lifted her head and looked at me. Her eyes were not filled with remorse or sadness. They were filled with a raw, cornered fury. The mask was completely gone. This was the real Sarah. "You have no right," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You have no right to go through my things, to spy on me. This is my money. I earned it. I let out a short, sharp laugh. You earned it? By doing what exactly? By taking cash out of the grocery budget? The budget funded by my 60-hour work weeks? By writing checks to cash from the account that I am the sole contributor to? You haven't had a real job in 15 years, Sarah. You call your freelance design work earning it? I've never seen a single invoice or a single client. Who are they? Tell me. I'd love to know. Her face flushed with anger. She was cornered, and like any trapped animal, she lashed out. You wouldn't understand. You never understood. My family needed me. My dad is sick. My mom is all alone. And Jessica has been through so much. They needed a safe place to land, a real home. Something you, with your perfect life and your perfect house, could never comprehend. So you decided to steal my life and my house to give to them? I shot back, my own voice finally rising, the icy calm beginning to crack. You decided that the solution to your family's problems was to defraud your own husband? The man who took your family in? Who loaned them money they never paid back? Who treated them like his own? This was your brilliant plan? To rob me blind and then run off to the mountains to play house with your sister? It wasn't supposed to be like this, she cried, the tears finally coming. But they weren't tears of guilt. They were tears of frustration. The tears of a failed criminal, not a remorseful wife. I was going to tell you, eventually. After we were settled, I was going to pay you back. Pay me back? I said, the absurdity of the statement leaving me breathless. Pay me back with what? You have no money, Sarah. You have my money. And you were never going to tell me. You were going to vanish. You were going to leave a note on the counter and disappear. That was the plan, wasn't it? Her silence was the only answer I needed. The whole sordid, pathetic truth was now laid bare between us. There was nothing left to argue about, nothing left to debate. There was only the cold, hard reality of her betrayal. I stood up, the movement feeling slow and heavy. I looked at her, this woman who had shared my bed and my life for 2 decades, and I felt nothing but a vast, hollow emptiness. The love was gone. The anger was fading. All that remained was the grim business of severing our lives. I walked over to the entryway table, where her purse Saturday. I reached inside and pulled out her set of keys. The keychain was a small, silver heart I had given her for our 10th anniversary. I walked back to the coffee table and held them out. The joint bank account is empty, Sarah, I said, my voice flat again. I've retained a lawyer. And this house, I paused, looking around the room. My room is in my name. It has always been in my name. You are no longer welcome here. I dropped the keys onto the table. They landed with a soft, metallic clink that seemed to echo through the entire house. It was the sound of a lock turning for the final time, a sound of absolute finality. And that's when it happened. She went completely and utterly silent. Her tears stopped. Her angry justifications died on her lips. She just stared at the keys, her face a blank canvas of shock. The reality of her situation, the full consequences of her actions, had finally crashed down upon her. She had no money. She had no access to our accounts. And she no longer had a key to this house. She had lost everything. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. It was the sound of a meticulously crafted lie finally and completely collapsing in on itself. The silence that fell over the room after I dropped the keys on the table was a living entity. It was heavy, oppressive, and filled with the ghosts of 20 years of shared history, now dead and buried. Sarah's face was ashen. The fight had gone out of her, replaced by a stark, terrifying clarity. She looked from the keys to the papers, and then finally back to me. In her eyes, I saw the full, crushing weight of her new reality. She wasn't the clever planner on the verge of a new life anymore. She was a woman with no home, no money, and a future that had just been wiped clean. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She closed it again. It was as if her entire vocabulary of excuses and manipulations had been short-circuited. What could she possibly say? There were no more lies to tell, no more emotional levers to pull. She had been so focused on the execution of her plan that she had never once considered the possibility of failure. I stood there, watching her, feeling strangely detached, like I was observing a scene from a movie. The emotional tempest had passed, leaving behind a barren landscape. "You need to pack a bag," I said, my voice devoid of any inflection. "You can take your personal belongings, clothes, toiletries, whatever fits in a suitcase. The rest of it, the furniture, the art, the things we bought together, that will all be sorted out by the lawyers." She still didn't speak. She just nodded slowly, a single, jerky movement. She rose from the couch like an old woman, her body seeming to ache with the effort. She walked past me, keeping her eyes fixed on the floor, and went up the stairs. I didn't follow her. I had no desire to watch her pack. I simply sank back into my armchair and listened to the sounds from upstairs. The soft opening and closing of drawers, the rustle of clothes, the faint click of a suitcase latch. Each sound was another thread being pulled from the tapestry of our life together. While she was packing, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Frank. "Account secured. Lien is in place. You're protected. Call me when it's done." A small measure of relief washed over me. I had done the right thing. I had protected myself. About 30 minutes later, she came back down the stairs, pulling a single, medium-sized suitcase behind her. She was dressed in jeans and a sweater. Her face was pale and puffy, but she wasn't crying anymore. She looked empty. She walked to the front door without looking at me. Her hand rested on the doorknob for a moment before she turned. "My car," she said, her voice hoarse. "The car is in both our names," I replied, my voice just as flat. "You can take it for now. We'll add it to the list of things for the lawyers to sort out." She nodded again. Then, she did something that surprised me. She looked directly at me, a flicker of the old Sarah in her eyes. "I did love you, David," she whispered. The words were meant to be a final, parting shot, a way to inflict one last ounce of pain, to make me question everything all over again. But they had no effect. It was like trying to strike a match in a vacuum. There was nothing left to ignite. "No, you didn't," I said. Not with anger, but with a simple, sad certainty. "You loved what I could provide. There's a difference." With that, she turned and opened the door. She walked out into the night, pulling her suitcase behind her, and didn't look back. I listened as she opened the car door, started the engine, and backed out of the driveway. The sound of the crunching gravel, which had once signaled her arrival, now signaled her final departure. Then, there was only silence. I stood in the doorway for a long time, looking out into the darkness. I expected to feel something: relief, triumph, sadness, grief. But I felt nothing. Just a profound, hollow stillness. The house behind me, my house, was silent. It was the first time in 20 years that I was completely and truly alone in it. I walked back into the living room and began to gather the papers from the coffee table. I stacked them neatly, put them back into their folder, and placed them on the mantelpiece. Evidence. I looked at the keys, still sitting where I had dropped them. Her keys. I picked them up, the silver heart keychain feeling cold in my palm, and I dropped them into the trash can. The hours that followed were a blur. I walked from room to room, the silence amplifying every creak of the floorboards. The house felt enormous, empty. Her presence lingered like a phantom limb. Her favorite throw blanket was still draped over the couch. Her half-read book was on the nightstand. Her coffee mug was in the dishwasher. It was as if she had just stepped out for a moment and not vanished from my life forever. I felt an overwhelming urge to erase her. I gathered the blanket, the book, a few of her sweaters she'd left behind, and I packed them into a donation box. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of survival. I needed to reclaim my space, to begin the process of turning our house back into my house. I finally called Frank around midnight. "It's done," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "She's gone. How are you holding up?" he asked, a rare note of genuine concern in his professional voice. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I just feel empty." "That's normal," he said. "The shock will wear off. The legal process starts Monday. It's going to be ugly, David. Be prepared for that. She and her sister will come at you with everything they've got." "I'm ready," I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. I ended the call and stood in the middle of my silent living room. The emptiness was still there, a vast, quiet space in my chest where my heart used to be. But as I stood there, another feeling began to seep in, slowly, tentatively. It was a feeling I hadn't realized I'd been missing for a very long time. It was the feeling of peace. The performance was over. The lies had stopped. The constant, low-level anxiety of suspicion was gone. For the first time in months, the air in my own home felt clean. It was a painful, brutal, and devastating peace. But it was peace, nonetheless. And I knew, in that quiet, lonely moment, that it was the foundation on which I would start to rebuild. The months that followed Sarah's departure were, as Frank had predicted, ugly. The divorce proceedings were a bitter, drawn-out war of attrition. Sarah, now fully under the influence of her sister Jessica, hired a notoriously aggressive lawyer. They tried everything. They accused me of emotional abuse, claiming my controlling financial behavior had forced her to save money in secret for her own safety. They tried to argue that the house, despite the deed being in my name, should be considered a primary marital asset and sold, with the proceeds split. They fought for lifetime alimony. They painted a picture of me as a tyrant, and Sarah as a long-suffering victim who had been planning a desperate escape. But they had one major problem: the evidence. My meticulous documentation became an unbreachable fortress. The bank statements, the purchase agreement for the Asheville house with Jessica's name on it, the sheer volume of proof of their conspiracy, it systematically dismantled every one of their false narratives. Frank was brilliant in court. He presented the story not as a messy divorce, but as a clear-cut case of financial fraud. When he presented the evidence that the closing on the North Carolina house had, in fact, failed because the seller backed out when their financing fell into question after I froze the accounts, their case completely crumbled. It proved their intent beyond any reasonable doubt. In the end, the judge saw through their lies. The divorce was granted. The house was legally affirmed as my sole and separate property. Because of the clear evidence of financial misconduct, she was awarded no alimony. She walked away with half of what was left of her secret Apex account after her legal fees. And the car. That was it. 20 years of marriage, and her grand scheme had left her with next to nothing. I heard through the grapevine that she and Jessica had a massive falling out. The dream of their shared life in the mountains had died, and all that was left was bitterness and blame. Sarah ended up moving in with her parents, into the same small, cramped house she had been so desperate to escape. For me, victory didn't feel like a celebration. It just felt like the end of a long, exhausting storm. The first few months of living alone were the hardest. The silence in the house was a constant reminder of my loss. Not the loss of Sarah, the person she had become, but the loss of the woman I thought I had married, the loss of the future I thought we were building. I would find myself expecting to hear her keys in the door, or to smell coffee brewing in the morning. The phantom pains of an amputated life. But slowly, day by day, I began to heal. The process started with the house itself. I began to reclaim it, to make it truly mine again. I repainted the bedroom, changing the soft yellow she had chosen to a calm, earthy green. I converted her old home office, the one she barely used, into a dedicated library for myself, lining the walls with new bookshelves I built. I started hosting poker nights with my crew from work, filling the house with laughter and the smell of pizza and beer. I was replacing the tainted memories with new, healthier ones. The house began to breathe again. My house. I found solace in my work. I threw myself into my projects with a renewed passion. The act of building, of creating something solid and real and honest from a set of plans, was therapeutic. It was the antithesis of the life of lies and delusions I had been living. My work was tangible. It was true. I took on a project restoring a historic downtown building, and the challenge consumed me in the best possible way. One day, about a year after the divorce was finalized, I was up on a ladder, inspecting some newly installed crown molding, when my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Hello?" A hesitant voice on the other end said. "David?" It was Sarah. I hadn't heard her voice in a year. It sounded different, thinner. All the confidence and manipulation had been stripped away. "What do you want, Sarah?" I asked, my voice polite but distant. I just wanted to say, "I'm sorry," she said, the words sounding rusty, unused. "For everything. You were right. Jessica, we had this crazy idea, and it just spiraled. I know it's too late, but I wanted you to hear it." I was silent for a moment, letting the words sink in. A year ago, an apology might have meant something. It might have offered some kind of closure, but now, it was just noise. "I appreciate the call, Sarah," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "But I've moved on. I hope you can too. Goodbye." I hung up the phone before she could reply, and as I slid the phone back into my pocket, I realized something profound. I felt no anger. I felt no sadness. I felt nothing at all. She was just a person I used to know. The hold she had on me was finally, completely broken. My life now is quiet, but it's my own. It's honest. I've reconnected with old friends. I go fishing on the weekends, and I'm even thinking about taking a trip to Italy next year to see the architecture. I've learned a hard lesson about trust, about the difference between loving someone and enabling them. The betrayal left a scar, there's no doubt about that. But scars are proof of healing. They're a reminder that you survived something that was meant to destroy you. And so, to all of you listening to my story, I want to leave you with this. Pay attention. Pay attention to the small details, to the gut feelings you try to ignore. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, but it shouldn't be blind. It has to be earned, and it has to be maintained. And if you find yourself in a house full of secrets, know that you have the strength to open the door and walk out into the clean, honest air of a new life. It's terrifying, but it's also the first step toward true peace. Thank you for being here, for listening. It means more than you know.